The rule was simple. Take her in, help her out, keep your distance. Easy, right? Except he's 37, famous for iron self-control, and she's the one weakness he never saw coming. When living together becomes routine, routine becomes danger, and that danger turns into the urge to do exactly what he shouldn't. The rain hammered against the windshield with such fury that Chloe could barely see the road ahead. Her hands gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white, every muscle in her body tense as she navigated the winding country lanes leading away from London. The clock on the dashboard read 2:47 a.m., and she had been driving for nearly 3 hours. Her eyes burning from exhaustion and tears she refused to let fall anymore. She had cried enough. For the past 2 days, she had cried until there was nothing left but a hollow ache in her chest and a determination to never let anyone make her feel this small again. The betrayal still felt fresh, like an open wound. Walking into James's apartment unannounced, hoping to surprise him with dinner after her graduation ceremony, only to find him in bed with someone else. The casual way he had shrugged, as if their year together meant nothing, as if she meant nothing. Chloe blinked hard, forcing the memory away. She would not give him any more of her tears, she would not give him any more of herself. The GPS announced she was approaching her destination, and through the sheets of rain, she could make out the imposing silhouette of Bradford Manor. Even in the darkness, even through the storm, the classical mansion commanded attention. Stone pillars flanked the entrance, and warm lights glowed from several windows, making the grand house look almost welcoming despite its formidable size. Her father had called Mason Bradford 3 days ago, explaining the situation with careful diplomacy. Chloe needed a place to stay, while she started her new position at Donovan Bradford Petroleum, the multinational company her father and Mason had built from the ground up 19 years ago. Richard Donovan trusted only one person in the entire world to look after his daughter, and that was the man he considered a brother. Chloe pulled her aging sedan to a stop in front of the mansion, rain still pounding relentlessly. She sat there for a moment, gathering her courage. She had met Mason Bradford countless times throughout her childhood, usually at Christmas dinners or company events. He was always polite, always distant, always impeccably dressed, and impossibly intimidating. She remembered him as a tall man with sharp features, who smiled rarely and spoke even less. If this story is touching your heart, show your support, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends. Every action helps us keep bringing you new stories full of emotion. Taking a deep breath, Chloe grabbed her purse and pushed the car door open. The rain immediately soaked through her clothes, cold and merciless. She ran to the trunk, wrestling with her 2 suitcases, her graduation cap tumbling into a puddle before she could catch it. "Damn it," she muttered, her voice lost in the roar of the storm. By the time she reached the front door, she was completely drenched. Her dark hair clung to her face and neck, her lightweight jacket providing absolutely no protection against the downpour. She raised a trembling hand and pressed the doorbell, hearing the chime echo somewhere deep inside the house. For a long moment, nothing happened. Chloe stood there shivering, water dripping down her spine, wondering if perhaps no one had heard the bell over the noise of the storm. She was about to ring again when the massive door swung open. Mason Bradford stood in the doorway and Chloe felt her breath catch. She had not seen him in at least 2 years, and the man before her was somehow both exactly as she remembered and completely different. He stood well over 6 feet tall, his broad shoulders filling the doorframe. He wore dark pajama pants and a plain black t-shirt that did nothing to hide the muscular build beneath. His jaw was as sharp as she remembered, now shadowed with stubble, and his dark eyes were assessing her with an intensity that made her want to look away. But what struck her most was the immediate concern that flashed across his typically impassive features. "Chloe," he said, his voice deep and slightly rough from sleep. "Good God, you're soaked through." He reached out and gently took one of her suitcases, then, without asking, simply wrapped his other hand around her upper arm and pulled her inside. The warmth of the house enveloped her immediately, but she could not stop shivering. Mason set down her suitcase and turned to face her fully. In the light of the grand entrance hall, Chloe became acutely aware of how she must look, drenched, bedraggled, her eyes surely still red from crying. She tried to maintain some dignity, straightening her spine despite the exhaustion weighing down every limb. "I'm sorry for arriving so late," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. The traffic was worse than I expected, and then the storm— It doesn't matter, Mason interrupted, his eyes scanning her face with an expression she could not quite read. You're freezing. Come with me. He picked up both of her suitcases as if they weighed nothing and started up the sweeping staircase. Chloe followed, leaving a trail of water on the polished marble floors. She wanted to apologize for the mess, but something about the set of Mason's shoulders told her he would not appreciate it. They walked down a long corridor lined with paintings and antique furniture until Mason stopped at a door near the end. He pushed it open and stepped aside, allowing her to enter first. The guest room was larger than her entire apartment back home. A four-poster bed dominated the space, covered in cream-colored linens that looked impossibly soft. French doors led to what she assumed was a balcony, though she could see nothing beyond them but darkness and rain. A fireplace sat cold and dark against one wall, and a door to the left presumably led to a bathroom. Mason set her suitcases down near an antique wardrobe and finally looked at her again. Really looked at her. Chloe felt exposed under that gaze, as if he could see past the wet clothes and tired smile to the broken pieces she was trying to hold together. The bathroom is through there, he said, gesturing to the door she had noticed. Take a hot shower, I'll bring you some tea. You don't have to— Chloe. He said her name with such quiet firmness that she immediately fell silent. Take a shower. Warm up. We can talk in the morning. She nodded, suddenly unable to form words. There was something about the way he looked at her, concerned but controlled, gentle but distant, that made her throat tighten with emotions she did not want to examine. Mason moved toward the door but paused at the threshold. He turned back, and for just a moment something flickered in his dark eyes, something almost like tenderness. Welcome home, Chloe, he said quietly. Then he was gone, closing the door softly behind him, leaving Chloe standing in the middle of the beautiful room, dripping water onto expensive carpet, wondering why those two simple words had made her feel safer than she had felt in months. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside Bradford Manor something else was beginning, something neither of them could have predicted, something that would change both of their lives forever. Chloe pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heart beat too fast beneath her palm, and tried to convince herself it was just the cold. Just the cold. Nothing more. Mason Bradford stood in his study at 5:30 in the morning, a cup of black coffee cooling in his hand, as he stared out at the grounds of his estate. The storm had passed, leaving the gardens glistening under the first light of dawn. Everything looked fresh and clean, washed new by the rain. He had not slept. After delivering tea to Chloe's room the night before, leaving the tray outside her door because he did not trust himself to see her again in that vulnerable state, he had retreated to his study and tried to work. But concentration eluded him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her standing in his entrance hall, soaked to the bone, those expressive green eyes red from crying, but still trying to maintain her composure. She was not supposed to look like that. She was supposed to still be Richard's little girl, the child who had once fallen asleep on his shoulder during a boring corporate dinner when she was 7 years old. The teenager who had blushed furiously when he had complimented her piano performance at her 16th birthday party. But the woman who had stood in his doorway last night was no child. She was 21, a university graduate, and heartbroken in a way that made Mason want to find the man responsible and do something he would definitely regret. He took a long drink of his coffee, now cold, and grimaced. Control. He needed to maintain control. Richard had entrusted him with his daughter's safety and well-being. That meant providing her with a place to stay, ensuring she settled into her new position at the company, and keeping her at arm's length emotionally. He owed his best friend that much. He owed himself that much. The sound of soft footsteps in the hallway made him turn. Through the partially open door of his study, he could see Chloe descending the staircase, and Mason felt something tighten in his chest. She wore simple jeans and a soft cream-colored sweater that made her dark hair stand out in contrast. Her face looked less tired than it had the night before, though he could still see shadows beneath her eyes. She moved quietly, as if trying not to disturb anyone, one hand trailing along the banister as she looked around the grand house with barely concealed wonder. Mason set down his coffee cup and stepped into the hallway before he could think better of it. "Good morning," he said, keeping his voice neutral. Chloe startled slightly, then smiled when she saw him. That smile did something dangerous to his carefully maintained composure. "Good morning," she replied, her voice still carrying a trace of sleepiness that he found far too appealing. "I hope I didn't wake you. I'm usually an early riser, and I thought I might make some coffee, but I'm not sure where." "The kitchen is this way," Mason interrupted, not because he wanted to cut her off, but because if she kept talking in that soft morning voice, he might say something inappropriate. "I'll show you." He led her through the house to the spacious kitchen, which was his favorite room in the entire manor. It had been completely renovated 3 years ago, with modern appliances, but still maintained the classical charm of the original design. Large windows overlooked the garden, and morning light was just beginning to filter through. "This is beautiful," Chloe breathed, moving to the window to look out at the rose garden. His housekeeper, Mrs. Patterson, tended with religious devotion. Mason busied himself with making fresh coffee, trying not to notice how the morning light caught in Chloe's hair, making it shine like polished mahogany, trying not to notice the graceful way she moved, or how small she looked in his kitchen, or how right she looked there. "How did you sleep?" he asked, focusing intently on measuring coffee grounds. "Better than I expected," Chloe admitted, turning away from the window. "That bed is incredibly comfortable, and thank you for the tea last night. I found it outside my door." "You're welcome." A silence fell between them, not quite comfortable, but not entirely awkward either. Mason could feel her watching him as he worked, and he wondered what she saw. Did she see the same man she had known since childhood, or did she see him differently now? "Mason," Chloe said quietly, and he realized it was the first time she had said his name directly to him. "I want to thank you for taking me in. I know it wasn't exactly planned, and I promise I won't be in your way. I've already started looking at apartments closer to the office, and I should be able to move out within a few weeks." Mason's hands stilled on the coffee maker. The thought of her leaving, of this house being empty again, sent an unexpected pang through him. "There's no rush," he said, keeping his tone carefully neutral. "This house has more than enough space, and it's good to have someone else here for a change." That was a lie. He had specifically chosen to live alone, to maintain his solitude and control. But somehow, the lie felt more true than any truth he had told himself in years. Chloe's expression softened, and she moved closer, close enough that he could smell her shampoo, something floral and clean that made him think of spring mornings. "Still," she said, "I don't want to impose. I know you value your privacy." Mason turned to face her fully and found her closer than he had anticipated. He could see flecks of gold in her green eyes, could count the freckles scattered across her nose. For a moment, he forgot what they were talking about. "You're not imposing," he said, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. Something shifted in the air between them. Chloe's lips parted slightly, and Mason's gaze dropped to her mouth before he could stop himself. He saw her notice, saw her pupils dilate just a fraction, and alarm bells started ringing in his head. He stepped back, turning away to pour the coffee into 2 mugs. "Your first day at the office is tomorrow," he said, deliberately changing the subject. "I've arranged for you to work in the strategic analysis department. It's a good place to start, and the team leader, Jonathan Hayes, is excellent at mentoring new analysts." Chloe accepted the coffee mug he handed her, her fingers briefly brushing his. The contact lasted less than a second, but Mason felt it like a shock of electricity. "I'm nervous," she admitted, wrapping both hands around the warm mug. "I've studied petroleum economics and business strategy for 4 years, but actually working in the field is different. What if I'm not good enough?" "You'll be excellent," Mason said with absolute certainty. "You graduated top of your class. Your thesis on sustainable energy integration in traditional petroleum companies was brilliant, and you have good instincts. Trust yourself." Chloe looked up at him with such surprise and pleasure that Mason realized he had probably said too much. She was not supposed to know he had read her thesis. Richard had sent it to him months ago, and Mason had read it 3 times, impressed by her intelligence and innovative thinking. "You read my thesis?" she asked, a smile tugging at her lips. "Richard sent it to me," Mason said, as if that explained everything. "And you actually read it? All 87 pages?" "It was well written. You made complex economic theories accessible without oversimplifying them. That's a rare skill." The smile that bloomed across Chloe's face was radiant, and Mason felt his careful control slipping further. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means a lot." coming from you. Dad always says you're the smartest person he knows. Your father is biased in my favor, Mason replied, but he could not help the small smile that tugged at his own lips. They stood there in the morning light, drinking coffee and exchanging small smiles, and Mason realized with something close to panic that he was in serious trouble, because Chloe Donovan was not Richard's little girl anymore. She was a woman, intelligent, beautiful, and far too easy to want, and wanting her was the one thing Mason absolutely could not allow himself to do. He would maintain his distance. He would be polite, professional, and nothing more. He would protect her as he had promised Richard, and that protection included protecting her from his own dangerous attraction. It was the right thing to do, the only thing to do, even if every instinct he had was screaming at him to pull her closer instead of pushing her away. Chloe's first week at Donovan Bradford Petroleum passed in a blur of meetings, introductions, and information overload. The London headquarters occupied 15 floors of a gleaming modern tower in the financial district, a stark contrast to Mason's classical manner. She found herself fascinated by the dichotomy, how Mason could be so comfortable in both worlds, commanding boardrooms with the same ease he showed wandering the gardens at dawn. She had discovered his morning ritual by accident on her third day. Unable to sleep, she had looked out her bedroom window at 5:30 to find him walking through the rose garden, coffee in hand, his tall figure a solitary silhouette against the lightening sky. There was something almost lonely about the image, and it had stayed with her all day. Now, as Friday afternoon drew to a close, Chloe gathered her notes from a particularly intense strategy meeting and tried not to notice how her hands trembled slightly. The meeting had gone well. She had contributed 2 ideas that Jonathan Hayes, her department head, had called innovative thinking, but the real challenge had been sitting 3 seats away from Mason and pretending his presence did not affect her. He had barely looked at her during the entire 2-hour meeting. When he did speak, his voice was coolly professional, his demeanor that of a CEO addressing his staff, nothing more. But twice, just twice, she had caught him watching her with an intensity that made her lose her train of thought entirely. "Chloe, do you have a moment?" She looked up to find Jonathan Hayes standing in the doorway of the small office she shared with 2 other junior analysts. He was in his early 40s, attractive in a conventional way, with sandy hair and an easy smile. In another life, before James, before heartbreak, before Mason, she might have found him interesting. "Of course," she said, closing her laptop. "I wanted to tell you that you're doing exceptional work," Jonathan said, leaning against her desk in a casual manner that felt slightly too familiar. "That observation you made about the North Sea drilling costs potentially conflicting with the new environmental regulations. Bradford was impressed. I could tell." Chloe felt warmth spread through her chest at the praise, though she tried to maintain a professional demeanor. "Thank you. I've been studying the regulatory changes closely. Well, it shows. Listen, a few of us are going for drinks after work to celebrate surviving the week. You should join us. It's a good way to get to know the team outside of the conference room." It was a reasonable invitation, exactly the kind of team-building exercise she should participate in. But something made her hesitate. "I'm not sure," she began. "I have some reports to finish." "Reports can wait," Jonathan interrupted with a grin. "Come on, Donovan, you've worked hard all week. You deserve a drink." Before she could respond, a familiar deep voice cut through the conversation. "Ms. Donovan has plans this evening." Both Chloe and Jonathan turned to find Mason standing in the hallway, his dark suit immaculate, his expression unreadable. He looked at Jonathan with polite coolness, then at Chloe with something that might have been concern. "We're driving back to the manor together," Mason continued, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Unless you've changed your mind about that." Chloe had not known they had such plans, but something in Mason's eyes told her to play along. "No," she said quickly. "I hadn't forgotten. I'm ready to leave whenever you are." Jonathan looked between them, clearly confused, but not wanting to challenge the CEO. "Right. Well, maybe next week then." "Maybe," Chloe agreed, already gathering her things. Mason waited in silence as she collected her belongings, his presence somehow managing to fill the small office, despite the fact that he stood perfectly still. When she was ready, he placed a hand lightly on the small of her back, so briefly that anyone watching might have missed it, and guided her toward the elevators. They did not speak until they were in his car, a sleek black Mercedes that probably cost more than her entire education. Mason drove with the same controlled precision he applied to everything else, navigating London traffic with practiced ease. "Thank you," Chloe said finally, breaking the silence, "for rescuing me back there." "Hayes was being inappropriate," Mason said, his jaw tight. "Your position is junior analyst, not social entertainment for lonely department heads." "He was just being friendly," Chloe protested, though privately she agreed there had been something slightly off about Jonathan's invitation. "He was being interested," Mason corrected, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "And that's not appropriate given the power dynamic." Chloe studied his profile, noting the tension in his shoulders, the muscle ticking in his jaw. "Are you angry with me?" "No." The word came out sharper than he probably intended, because he took a breath and softened his tone. "No, Chloe, I'm not angry with you. I'm frustrated with Hayes for putting you in that position. You could have just texted me. You didn't have to come down to my office personally." Mason was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "I know." Those two words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Chloe felt her heart rate pick up, felt something warm and dangerous unfurl in her chest. "Mason, how are you settling in?" he asked, deliberately changing the subject. "Is the work what you expected?" Chloe recognized the deflection for what it was, but she allowed it. "It's challenging, I love it. Everyone has been welcoming, and the projects I'm working on are exactly the kind of thing I studied for." "Good, that's good." He paused, then added quietly, "Your father called me this afternoon. He wanted to know how you're doing." "What did you tell him?" "That you're thriving. That you're everything we hoped you would be." Mason glanced at her briefly, and in that moment she saw past his careful control to something warmer underneath. Because it's true. The compliment, delivered in his matter-of-fact tone, meant more than any elaborate praise could have. Chloe felt tears prick at her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. "Hey," Mason said, alarmed. He pulled the car over to the side of the quiet country road they had turned onto, throwing it into park. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," Chloe said, wiping at her eyes. "I'm sorry, it's just been an emotional week. New job, new city, new everything. And you've been so kind, and I—" She broke off, unable to finish the sentence. Unable to say that she was falling for him, that every morning coffee together made it worse, that his rare smiles felt like gifts she did not deserve. Mason unbuckled his seatbelt and turned to face her fully. For a moment, he seemed to wage an internal battle with himself. Then, with a tenderness that stole her breath, he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "You deserve kindness, Chloe," he said softly. "You deserve so much more than what you've been given." His thumb traced along her cheekbone, and Chloe's breath caught. She could see the war in his eyes, desire fighting against restraint, want battling with duty. She could feel the heat of his hand, could count every inch between them. "Mason," she whispered, not sure if it was a question or a plea. His eyes dropped to her lips, and for one heart-stopping moment, she thought he might kiss her. She wanted him to. God, she wanted him to so badly it hurt. But instead he pulled his hand back as if she had burned him, turned forward and restarted the car. "We should get home," he said, his voice rough. "Mrs. Patterson is making dinner." Chloe nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. As they drove the rest of the way in silence, she pressed her fingers to her cheek where his hand had been, still feeling the warmth of his touch. Neither of them noticed the silver sedan that had been following them since they left the office, its driver making careful note of every detail. Mason stood at his bedroom window at 2 in the morning, unable to sleep for the third night in a row. Below, the gardens were bathed in moonlight, peaceful and still. He should be peaceful too. Should be content with his well-ordered life. Should not be thinking about the woman sleeping 3 doors down the hall. But he was thinking about her. He had been thinking about nothing but her for the past 2 weeks. The moment in the car had been a mistake. Touching her face, letting himself look at her mouth, allowing his careful control to slip even for those few dangerous seconds. It had been monumentally stupid. Because now he knew exactly how soft her skin was, knew the precise shade of green her eyes turned, when she looked at him with that mixture of hope and confusion, knew how desperately he wanted to pull her close and damn the consequences. He pressed his forehead against the cool window glass and tried to summon the discipline that had carried him through 2 decades of business negotiations, hostile takeovers, and impossible odds. But all his legendary control seemed to evaporate whenever Chloe walked into a room. Their morning coffees had become the best part of his day, even though he knew he should stop them. The way she curled up in the breakfast nook with her laptop, glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed reports, the way she laughed at his dry observations about office politics, the way she had started leaving little notes for him when she left early. "Good morning. Don't forget your umbrella today, the forecast said rain." See, he had saved every single note. That alone should have alarmed him. A soft sound from the hallway made him turn. Through his partially open door he could see a light on downstairs. Frowning, Mason pulled on a shirt over his sleep pants and went to investigate. He found Chloe in the library, curled up in one of the leather armchairs with a book in her lap and tears streaming silently down her face. She did not notice him at first, lost in whatever she was reading, and Mason stood frozen in the doorway, unsure whether to intrude or retreat. Then she looked up and saw him. "I'm sorry," she said immediately, wiping at her eyes. "I didn't mean to wake you. I couldn't sleep and I thought reading might help, but then I got to this part where the main character's father tells her how proud he is and I—" She broke off, pressing a hand to her mouth. Mason crossed the room before he could think better of it and knelt beside her chair. "What's wrong, Chloe?" She shook her head, looking embarrassed. "It's silly. I'm just being emotional." "It's not silly if it made you cry." He kept his voice gentle, concerned. "Talk to me." Chloe took a shaky breath. "My father called today, just to check in, see how I'm doing. And he was proud, Mason. So proud. He kept telling everyone at his office that his daughter works at headquarters now, that she's doing so well, but the whole time I was thinking—" She paused, fresh tears spilling over. "What if I'm not good enough? What if I fail? What if I disappoint him?" "You won't," Mason said with absolute certainty. "You don't know that." "Yes, I do." He reached up, and knowing it was a terrible idea but unable to stop himself, cupped her face in both hands and tilted it toward him. "Chloe, listen to me. You are brilliant. You're one of the most naturally talented analysts I've seen in 20 years. Your work this week has been exceptional, and everyone in that office knows it. Jonathan said you don't usually notice junior analysts," Chloe whispered, her eyes searching his face. "I don't," Mason admitted, "but you're impossible not to notice." The words hung between them, more revealing than he had intended. Chloe's breath hitched, and Mason became acutely aware that he was kneeling beside her chair at 2 in the morning, holding her face in his hands, with her looking at him like he had hung the moon. He should move, should let go, should put distance between them before he did something unforgivable, but he could not seem to make himself move. "Mason," Chloe said softly, one of her hands coming up to rest over his, where it cupped her cheek. "Why do you always pull away?" "Because I have to," he said, his voice rough with the effort of maintaining control. "Why?" "Because you're 21 years old. Because your father is my best friend. Because I'm supposed to be taking care of you, not—" He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "Not what?" Chloe pressed, her thumb stroking along his wrist. "Not wanting me?" The directness of the question nearly undid him. Mason closed his eyes, trying to find his center, trying to remember all the reasons this was impossible. "Chloe, I'm not a child," she interrupted, her voice stronger now. "I know you see me that way. I know that's how you've always seen me, but I'm not that little girl anymore. I haven't been for a long time." "I know that," Mason said, opening his eyes to meet hers, and God help him. He did know. He was painfully, constantly aware that Chloe Donovan had grown into a woman who made him question every choice he had ever made. That's exactly the problem. They stared at each other, the air between them crackling with tension. Mason's thumbs moved of their own accord, stroking along her cheekbones, wiping away the last traces of tears. He watched her eyes darken, watched her lips part slightly, and felt his resolve crumbling like sand. Then his phone buzzed loudly from his bedroom upstairs, shattering the moment. Mason pulled back immediately, standing and putting several feet between them. I need to check that. It might be important." "Of course," Chloe said, her voice small. Mason forced himself to walk away, to climb the stairs, to answer the phone even though he knew it was just a routine security alert. When he returned 15 minutes later, the library was empty and dark, and Chloe's door was firmly closed. He stood in the hallway for a long moment, fighting the urge to knock, fighting the urge to finish what they had started, fighting the urge to stop fighting altogether. Finally, he returned to his own room and lay awake until dawn, knowing that things between them had fundamentally shifted, and there was no going back to the careful distance he had tried to maintain. The following Monday, the office buzzed with news of the annual corporate gala scheduled for the end of the month. It was the social event of the year for Donovan Bradford Petroleum, where all the major shareholders, partners, and executives gathered for an evening of networking disguised as celebration. Chloe learned about it from Jonathan Hayes, who stopped by her desk with printed invitations. "It's black tie," he explained, handing her the elegant cream-colored card. "And technically you're not required to attend since you're still in your probationary period, but it's a great opportunity to make connections. I could pick you up if you'd like. Make sure you don't get lost." Chloe opened her mouth to politely decline, but a voice from behind her spoke first. "Miss Donovan will be attending as my guest," Mason said coolly. He stood in the doorway of their small office, looking every inch the powerful CEO in his charcoal suit. "Since she's living at my residence temporarily, it makes sense for us to travel together." Jonathan's smile faltered. "Of course, Mr. Bradford, I didn't realize." "Now you do." Mason's tone was pleasant, but his eyes were ice. "And Hayes, I need to see you in my office, now." Jonathan left immediately, and Chloe turned to face Mason. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." He stepped into the office, lowering his voice. "He's been circling you for weeks. It needs to stop. He's just being friendly." "He's being predatory," Mason corrected. "And if he doesn't understand boundaries after our conversation today, he'll find himself transferred to our Alaska operations." Despite herself, Chloe felt a small thrill at his protectiveness. "Alaska? It's very remote," Mason said, a hint of dark humor in his voice. "Excellent for people who need to learn respect." He started to leave, then paused. "Buy whatever dress you want for the gala. Charge it to my account." "I can't." "Yes, you can. Consider it part of your welcome package." He looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. "I want you to feel confident, beautiful." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving her staring after him and wondering how it was possible to be frustrated and charmed and hopelessly attracted to someone all at once. 3 weeks until the gala. 3 weeks of morning coffees and charged silences, and careful distance that felt more intimate than any touch. 3 weeks to figure out what was happening between them, and whether she was brave enough to fight for it. The dress shop in Knightsbridge was the kind of place Chloe would never have entered on her own. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, and every gown displayed looked like it cost more than her monthly salary. She stood just inside the entrance, feeling completely out of place despite the warm greeting from the impeccably dressed attendant. "Miss Donovan," the woman approached with a professional smile. "Mr. Bradford called ahead. He mentioned you needed something for the gala. I'm Claire, and I'll be helping you today." Of course Mason had called ahead. The man seemed to think of everything. 2 hours later, Chloe stood in front of a 3-way mirror, barely recognizing her reflection. The gown was stunning. A deep emerald green that brought out her eyes, with a fitted bodice and a skirt that flowed like water when she moved. The back dipped low, elegant rather than provocative, and the whole effect was sophisticated and timeless. "It's perfect," Claire said with satisfaction. "Mr. Bradford will be very pleased." Chloe felt her cheeks warm at the comment. "It's just a work event." Claire's knowing smile suggested she did not believe that for a second, but she was too professional to say so. That evening, Chloe found Mason in his study as usual, working late despite it being nearly 8 o'clock. She knocked softly on the open door and he looked up, his expression immediately softening when he saw her. "I bought a dress," she said, staying in the doorway. "Thank you for arranging everything. I promise I'll pay you back when—" "No." Mason set down his pen and leaned back in his chair, studying her. "It's a gift. Consider it done." "Mason, I can't accept such an expensive gift." "Why not?" The question was simple, but loaded with complexity. Because gifts like that meant something. Because she was already too attached to him, already falling too hard, and accepting felt like crossing a line she could not uncross. "Because, yeah," she said finally, unable to articulate all the reasons swirling in her mind. Mason stood and crossed to her, moving with that quiet grace that always caught her off guard in a man so large. He stopped just in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Chloe, I want to do this for you," he said quietly. "Let me." She nodded, not trusting her voice. For a moment they just stood there, the air between them charged with all the things they were not saying. Then Mason's phone rang, breaking the spell, and Chloe quickly excused herself. She did not see the small smile that crossed Mason's face as he watched her go, or the way he had to take a moment to compose himself before answering the call. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange rhythm. At work, Mason remained professionally distant, their interactions limited to necessary business discussions. But at the manor, something was shifting. Their morning coffees stretched longer. They started eating dinner together every night, and the conversations deepened. One evening, as rain pattered against the windows, Chloe asked him about his family. Mason had been quiet for a long moment before answering. "My parents died in a car accident when I was 23, he said, staring into his wineglass. "Right after I graduated from university. Your father helped me through it, gave me a job when I had nothing, believed in me when I did not believe in myself. That's why—" He stopped, looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "That's why your father's trust means everything to me." Chloe understood then. Understood why Mason fought so hard against whatever was building between them. It was not just about age or appropriateness. It was about loyalty to the man who had saved him when he had nowhere else to turn. "My father would want you to be happy," she said softly. "Would he?" Mason's laugh was bitter. "I'm not sure he would think his daughter was the path to that happiness." "What do you think?" Mason looked at her for a long moment, and she saw the war in his eyes, want versus duty, desire versus honor. Finally, he stood and carried his glass to the sink. "I think," he said carefully, "that we should both get some sleep. It's late." It became their pattern, getting close, then pulling back, a touch that lingered too long, then careful distance. Conversations that verged on confession, then retreat into safer territory. But there were lighter moments too, glimpses of what they could be without the weight of complications. One morning, Chloe came down to find Mason attempting to make pancakes, the kitchen in absolute chaos. Flour covered the counter, something was burning in the pan, and he looked so utterly frustrated that she could not help but laugh. "Don't," he warned, pointing a spatula at her. "Don't laugh." "I'm not," she said, clearly lying as giggles escaped. You look so serious, like you're negotiating a billion-dollar deal instead of making breakfast." "Pancakes are serious business," Mason said with such gravity that she laughed harder. "Here, let me help." She moved beside him, showing him how to check if the pan was the right temperature, how to pour the batter so it cooked evenly. They worked together in comfortable silence, and when she looked up she found him watching her with an expression so tender it stole her breath. "What?" she asked. "Nothing," he said. "Just thank you for pancakes, for making this house feel less empty." Another evening they discovered a shared love of old films. Mason produced a collection of classic movies from his library, and they spent a rainy Sunday watching them curled up on opposite ends of the couch in the living room. By the third film, the distance between them had narrowed considerably, and Chloe fell asleep with her head near his shoulder. Mason sat perfectly still for over an hour, not wanting to wake her, finally carrying her upstairs to her room when the film ended. He laid her gently on the bed and pulled the blanket over her, allowing himself one moment to brush her hair back from her face. "This is going to destroy me," he whispered to her sleeping form. "You're going to absolutely destroy me, and I'm going to let you." Then he left, closing the door quietly behind him, unaware that Chloe had woken at his words and now lay in the darkness with tears streaming down her face, not from sadness, but from the realization that she was completely, irrevocably in love with Mason Bradford, and she had no idea if he would ever allow himself to love her back. 3 days before the gala, everything changed. Chloe was working late at the office, the floor mostly empty except for a few die-hard analysts finishing reports. She was so focused on her projections that she did not notice someone approach until a voice spoke behind her. "Working late, as usual." She turned to find Jonathan Hayes leaning against her desk, his smile friendly, but his eyes calculating in a way that made her uncomfortable. "Just finishing up some analysis," she said neutrally, closing her laptop. "I was about to head out, actually. I'll walk you to your car," Jonathan offered. "It's not safe for a woman alone this late." "That's not necessary. I insist." Something in his tone made it clear it was not really an offer. Chloe gathered her things, unease prickling along her spine. As they walked to the parking garage, Jonathan kept up a steady stream of conversation that felt forced, standing too close, his hand occasionally touching her lower back in a way that made her want to pull away. When they reached her car, he positioned himself between her and the driver's door. "You know," he said, his voice taking on an edge, "I've been trying to be patient, trying to be friendly, but you keep running to Bradford every time I get close. Jonathan, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "Has there?" He stepped closer, backing her against her car. "Or are you just playing games, leading me on while you warm Bradford's bed?" "That's completely inappropriate," Chloe said, her voice shaking but firm. "Please step back." "Why? Are you going to tell Bradford?" Jonathan laughed, but there was something ugly in it. "Everyone knows you're his pet project. The boss's best friend's daughter. Do you really think anyone respects you based on your own merit?" The words hit harder than Chloe expected, finding every insecurity she had tried to bury. Before she could respond, a voice cut through the parking garage like a whip. "Step away from her now!" Mason stood 20 feet away, his entire body radiating controlled fury. Chloe had never seen him look so dangerous. Jonathan immediately stepped back, his face paling. "Mr. Bradford, I was just—" "Leaving," Mason finished, his voice deadly quiet as he approached. "You're leaving. This building, this company, this city. Pack your desk tonight. Your severance will be generous because I don't want legal complications. But if I ever hear that you've come near Ms. Donovan again, I will personally ensure you never work in this industry anywhere in the world. You can't fire me for harassment, intimidation, creating a hostile work environment." Mason was beside Chloe now, subtly positioning himself between her and Jonathan. "I absolutely can. And I have 3 security cameras that recorded this entire conversation. So either you leave now with your reputation somewhat intact, or I call the police and make this official. Your choice." Jonathan's jaw worked, fury and fear warring on his face. Finally, he turned and stalked toward the elevator. The moment he was gone, Mason turned to Chloe, his expression transforming from cold anger to deep concern. "Are you all right? Did he touch you?" Chloe nodded, then shook her head, then found herself unable to hold back the tears that had been threatening. "He said, 'Everyone thinks I'm just—'" "No." Mason pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. "No, Chloe. Everyone knows you're brilliant. His insecurities don't change the truth." She cried against his shirt while he held her, one hand stroking her hair, the other wrapped firmly around her waist. She felt safe here, protected, valued. When she finally pulled back, Mason kept his hands on her shoulders, his eyes searching her face. "I'm taking you home," he said, "and we're going to talk about security protocols, because this never happens again." As they drove back to the manor in his car, Mason's hand found hers across the console and held it tight. Neither of them let go the entire way home. That night, Mason could not let Chloe out of his sight. After they arrived home, he made her tea, built a fire in the living room despite the mild weather, and sat with her until she stopped trembling. The protective fury he felt was unlike anything he had experienced before, primal and overwhelming. "I should have handled Hayes weeks ago," he said, more to himself than to her. "I knew he was circling you. I should have." "Mason." Chloe placed her hand over his, and he realized his fists were clenched so tightly his knuckles had gone white. "It's not your fault. And you protected me tonight. You've always protected me." He looked at their joined hands, at how small and delicate hers appeared against his, and something inside him cracked open. "When I saw him cornering you," Mason said, his voice rough. "When I heard the things he was saying—" He broke off, unable to finish, unable to articulate the pure rage that had consumed him, the fear that he might have been too late, the realization that if anything happened to her, he would burn the entire world down. "But you were there," Chloe said softly, moving closer on the couch until their shoulders touched. You're always there when I need you. Mason turned to look at her and found her face inches from his. In the firelight, she was breathtakingly beautiful. Dark hair tumbling over her shoulders, green eyes reflecting the flames, lips slightly parted. He could see every delicate feature, every emotion playing across her expressive face. "Chloe," he breathed, and heard the warning in his own voice. Warning himself, warning her. But she did not pull away. Instead, she lifted her free hand and traced along his jaw, her touch feather-light, but burning through him like a brand. "What are we doing?" she whispered. "I don't know," Mason admitted. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb stroking along her cheekbone. "I've tried so hard not to feel this. Tried to maintain distance. Tried to remember all the reasons this is impossible. But Chloe, tell me," she urged, turning her face into his palm. "Tell me what you feel." Mason closed his eyes, warring with himself. Every principle he had ever held told him to stop, to pull back, to protect her from this complicated situation. But sitting there with her so close, feeling her hand in his, seeing the hope and vulnerability in her eyes, he could not lie anymore. "I feel like I'm losing my mind," he confessed, opening his eyes to meet hers. "I feel like every moment I'm near you is torture, because I want to pull you close and I can't. I feel like my entire world has narrowed to the sound of your laugh, the way you bite your lip when you're concentrating, how your eyes light up when you solve a complex problem. I feel—" He stopped, the words catching in his throat. "What?" Chloe pressed, her hand tightening on his. "What do you feel, Mason?" "Terrified," he admitted. "Because I'm falling for you, and it's the worst possible thing that could happen." Tears spilled down Chloe's cheeks, but she was smiling. "Why is it the worst thing?" "Because you're Richard's daughter. Because there's 16 years between us. Because I'm supposed to be taking care of you, not wanting you the way I do." He brushed away her tears with his thumb, his touch infinitely gentle. "Because when this ends badly, and it will, I'll lose not just you but your father too. And I'm not sure I can survive that." "What if it doesn't end badly?" Chloe asked. "What if we could make this work?" Mason wanted to believe her. God, how he wanted to believe that they could somehow navigate all the obstacles between them. But he had spent his entire adult life being realistic, being practical, and every practical bone in his body told him this path led to heartbreak. "Your father would never understand," he said quietly. "Then we make him understand." Chloe shifted even closer until she was nearly in his lap. "Mason, I'm not asking for easy. I'm not asking for simple. I'm just asking you not to push me away anymore." Mason stared at her, feeling his carefully constructed walls crumbling. "Chloe, I know you feel it too," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "This connection between us, it's not just me. I see the way you look at me when you think I'm not paying attention. I see how your hands shake sometimes when you hand me my coffee. I see you, Mason, really see you, and I—" She stopped, seeming to lose her nerve. "You what?" Mason asked, his heart hammering against his ribs. "I'm falling for you too," she whispered. "Have been for weeks now, maybe longer. And I know it's complicated and messy and probably a terrible idea, but I can't help it. I don't want to help it." Mason sat perfectly still, her words washing over him like a wave. She was falling for him. This brilliant, beautiful woman who could have anyone, who should have someone her own age without all his baggage and complications. She was falling for him. Every rational thought told him to end this now, to let her down gently and restore the professional distance between them. But looking at her tear-stained face, feeling her hand clutching his like a lifeline, all his rationality fled. "This is a terrible idea," he said. "I know. Your father will be furious. I know. People at work will talk. They'll say I'm taking advantage of you. I know." Chloe's voice was steady now, certain. "But I'm an adult, Mason. I make my own choices, and I choose this. I choose you. If you want me to." Mason looked at her for a long moment, memorizing every detail of her face. Then, with a surrender that felt like both defeat and victory, he leaned forward until their foreheads touched. "I want you," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "God help me, I want you so much it scares me." Chloe's breath hitched, and he felt her hand slide up to cup the back of his neck. They stayed like that, breathing each other's air, balanced on the knife's edge between friendship and something infinitely more dangerous. Mason's eyes dropped to her lips, and he felt her fingers tighten in his hair. One movement. That was all it would take. One small movement, and he could close the distance, could finally taste her mouth, could stop fighting this impossible pull between them. But not yet. Not when emotions were running this high, not when she had just been through something traumatic, not when he was not absolutely certain she understood what she was choosing. With more willpower than he knew he possessed, Mason pulled back slightly. "Not tonight," he said, seeing the confusion and hurt flash across her face. "Not like this, Chloe. When we cross that line, and we will cross it, I think we both know that now. I want you to be absolutely sure, no doubts, no second thoughts. Can you understand that?" Slowly, Chloe nodded. "You're right. You're always so rational. Trust me, rationality is the last thing I'm feeling right now." Mason stood, putting necessary distance between them before he changed his mind. "But I respect you too much to rush this. We have time." "Do we?" Chloe asked, standing as well. "My father will be here next week for the gala. Once he finds out—" "Then we have 1 week," Mason interrupted. 1 week to figure out if this is real or just proximity and attraction. 1 week before everything becomes infinitely more complicated. Chloe studied him for a long moment, then nodded. 1 week. She started toward the stairs, then paused and turned back. Crossing to him quickly, she stood on her tiptoes and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek, her lips lingering for just a moment. "Thank you," she whispered against his skin, "for protecting me, for being honest, for not pushing me away." Then she was gone, leaving Mason standing alone in the fire-lit room, one hand pressed to his cheek where her lips had touched, his heart racing like he had just run a marathon. 1 week. They had 1 week to figure out if they were brave enough to reach for something real or wise enough to walk away before anyone got hurt. Mason suspected it was already too late for wisdom. The next morning, Mason found Chloe in the kitchen earlier than usual, already dressed for work in a professional charcoal dress that made her look every inch the capable analyst she was. She was making coffee, humming softly to herself, and when she turned and saw him, her smile was radiant. "Good morning," she said, handing him a cup prepared exactly how he liked it. Black, no sugar, strong enough to wake the dead. "Good morning." Mason accepted the cup, his fingers brushing hers in the exchange. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep." She leaned against the counter, cradling her own mug. "I have a big presentation this afternoon about the Sustainability Integration Project. I'm nervous." "Don't be, you'll be brilliant." Mason moved to stand beside her, close but not touching. "What time is the presentation?" 3 o'clock. "I'll be there." Chloe looked up at him in surprise. "Oh, you don't have to." "I want to," Mason interrupted. "Besides, as CEO, I should be present for all major project presentations." The smile she gave him made his heart do something complicated in his chest. They drove to work together, and Mason found himself breaking his usual rule of silence during the commute. Instead, he asked about her presentation, listened as she talked through her key points, offered suggestions that made her eyes light up with understanding. "You're really good at this," she said, as they pulled into the executive parking garage. Mentoring." "Only with students worth mentoring," Mason replied. He walked her to her floor, ignoring the curious looks from employees who rarely saw their CEO wandering the junior analyst spaces. At her office door, he paused. "Chloe," he said quietly, making sure no one else could hear. "What Hayes said last night, none of it was true. You've earned every bit of respect you have here based purely on your own merit. Don't let his poison make you doubt that." She looked up at him with gratitude and something deeper. "Thank you, Mason." 3 o'clock, he reminded her. "I'll be there." As he walked away, he could feel her watching him and had to resist the urge to turn around and look back. The rest of the day crawled by. Mason tried to focus on work, on the dozen urgent matters that required his attention, but his mind kept drifting to Chloe, to her presentation, to how much he wanted her to succeed, to how dangerous it was that her happiness had become so essential to his own. At 2:55, he made his way to the conference room. The space was already filling with department heads and senior analysts, all curious about the sustainability project that had been generating buzz. Mason took a seat near the back, wanting to observe without making Chloe more nervous. At exactly 3 o'clock, Chloe walked in, and Mason's breath caught. She had changed into a deep navy blazer that brought out her eyes, her hair pulled back in a professional twist. But it was the confidence in her bearing that struck him, shoulders back, chin up, every inch the competent professional. She caught his eye for just a moment, and he gave her a small nod of encouragement. Then she began to speak, and Mason forgot about everything else. For the next 45 minutes he watched her command the room, presenting complex economic models with clarity, anticipating questions before they were asked, defending her proposals with logic and passion. She was magnificent. When she finished, the room erupted in questions, not challenging ones, but engaged, interested questions from people who clearly respected what she had to say. Mason noticed several senior executives taking notes, nodding in approval. Pride swelled in his chest, fierce and overwhelming. This brilliant woman was falling for him, had chosen him, and he was going to do everything in his power to deserve that choice. After the presentation ended and people filed out, all congratulating Chloe on her work, Mason remained in his seat. When the room finally cleared, she walked over to him, her professional mask slipping to reveal nervous hope. "Well?" she asked. Mason stood, closing the distance between them. They were alone, but the glass walls of the conference room meant anyone walking by could see them, so he kept a careful distance. "That was exceptional," he said, meaning every word. "You're going to change this company, Chloe. You're going to change this entire industry." Her smile could have lit up the entire building. "Really?" she asked. "Really?" Mason allowed himself one moment of impropriety. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair that had escaped her twist behind her ear, letting his fingers linger against her skin for just a heartbeat. "I'm so proud of you." "Mason!" Whatever she was about to say was interrupted by voices in the hallway. Mason stepped back immediately, resuming professional distance, but not before he saw the heat in her eyes, the promise of things to come. "Dinner tonight?" he asked quietly. "To celebrate." "I'd like that." As Mason left the conference room, he felt eyes on him and turned to see several colleagues watching with barely concealed curiosity. Let them wonder. Let them talk. He was done pretending that Chloe Donovan was just another employee. She was so much more than that. And in 3 days at the gala, everyone would know it. The night of the gala arrived with the weight of inevitability. Mason stood in his bedroom, adjusting his bow tie for the 3rd time, uncharacteristically nervous. In all his years of attending corporate events, he had never felt this particular flutter of anticipation mixed with dread. Tonight would change everything. Richard Donovan would be there, flying in specifically for the event. Mason would have to watch Chloe from across the room, maintain professional distance, and somehow pretend that she had not become the center of his entire universe. A soft knock on his door made him turn. "Mason, are you ready? The car will be here in 10 minutes. "Come in," he called, taking a steadying breath. The door opened, and Mason forgot how to breathe entirely. Chloe stood in the doorway wearing the emerald dress, and she was absolutely breathtaking. The color made her eyes luminous, the cut showcased her graceful figure, and she had done something elegant with her hair, swept up with a few tendrils framing her face. But it was the confidence in her bearing, the way she stood tall despite the nervous smile playing at her lips, that truly captivated him. "Will I do?" she asked, doing a small turn. Mason could not speak for a moment. Finally he managed, "You're stunning, absolutely stunning." Color bloomed in her cheeks. "You look rather handsome yourself." He did turn then, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "Chloe, about tonight. Your father will be there. We need to be careful." "I know." She moved into the room and he turned to face her properly. "But Mason, I'm tired of being careful. I'm tired of pretending." "One more night," he said quietly, reaching out to take her hand. "Let me talk to Richard first. Let me explain before he sees something and draws his own conclusions. He deserves that much." Chloe squeezed his fingers. "When will you tell him?" "Tomorrow. I'll drive up to his hotel in the morning." Mason lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "I promise, Chloe. No more hiding after tonight." The car ride to the venue was torture. They sat on opposite ends of the back seat, maintaining proper distance, but Mason's eyes kept drifting to her. The way the streetlights played across her face, the elegant line of her neck, the small smile she tried to hide when she caught him looking. "Stop," she whispered, though her smile widened. "I can't help it." You're going to give us away before we even arrive. Mason forced himself to look out the window instead, but reached across the seat to take her hand in the darkness. She held on tight. The gala was held at the Langham, one of London's most prestigious hotels. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, and everywhere Mason looked, he saw the titans of the petroleum industry mixing with shareholders and executives. This was his world, power and money and carefully orchestrated networking. But tonight all he cared about was the woman at his side. Mr. Bradford, Ms. Donovan. The company's communications director appeared, champagne flutes in hand. So glad you both made it. Ms. Donovan, I heard about your sustainability presentation. Brilliant work. Everyone's talking about it. Thank you, Chloe said graciously, accepting a glass. As more people approached to congratulate Chloe or speak with Mason about business, he found himself watching her work the room. She was natural at this, engaging without being pushy, intelligent without being condescending, warm without being overly familiar. Pride swelled in his chest again. Then he saw Richard Donovan enter the ballroom, and everything else faded. Mason's best friend looked exactly as he always did, confident, distinguished, his salt and pepper hair perfectly styled. He scanned the room and immediately spotted his daughter. His face lit up with paternal pride as he made his way toward them. "There's my brilliant girl." Richard pulled Chloe into a hug, then turned to Mason with a warm handshake. "Mason, good to see you. Thank you for taking such good care of my daughter. She tells me you've been the perfect host." "It's been my pleasure," Mason said, meaning it in ways Richard could not possibly understand. "Dance with me, sweetheart," Richard said to Chloe. "Let me show off my accomplished daughter." As Mason watched Richard lead Chloe to the dance floor, a cold voice spoke behind him. "They make quite a picture, don't they?" Mason turned to find Margaret Whitmore, one of the company's longest-serving board members and notorious gossip. She watched the dancing father and daughter with calculating eyes. "Richard must be so proud," she continued. "Though I have to say, Mr. Bradford, there are some interesting rumors circulating about you and young Miss Donovan." Mason's expression remained neutral, but internally he went on high alert. "Rumors, Mrs. Whitmore. People talk. They've noticed how protective you are, how you attend her presentations, how you look at her when you think no one is watching." She smiled, sharp and knowing. "Some might think it inappropriate. The CEO showing such favoritism to a junior analyst who happens to be living in his home." Every protective instinct Mason had roared to life. Ms. Donovan's success is based entirely on her own merit and intelligence. Anyone who suggests otherwise is welcome to review her performance evaluations, which are impeccable. "Oh, I'm sure they are." Margaret's smile did not reach her eyes. "I'm just saying, appearances matter in our world. Especially when there's such a significant age gap involved, people might get the wrong idea." Before Mason could respond, the song ended, and Richard was leading Chloe back toward them. Mason saw the moment Richard noticed Margaret's presence, saw his friend's expression shift from warm to cautiously polite. "Margaret," Richard greeted, "always a pleasure." "Richard, your daughter is lovely." "Mason was just telling me how impressed everyone is with her work." Margaret's tone was innocent, but her eyes gleamed with mischief. Such a lucky girl, having both her father and his best friend watching over her career so carefully. The implication hung in the air like poison. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly, and Mason saw his friend's sharp mind beginning to work, putting pieces together that Mason had hoped to explain privately, carefully, with time to make Richard understand. But time had just run out. "Excuse us," Mason said smoothly, taking Chloe's elbow. "I promised Miss Donovan this dance." Before Richard or Margaret could object, Mason guided Chloe onto the dance floor, pulling her into his arms with a possessiveness he could no longer hide. "What was that about?" Chloe asked, sensing the tension. "Trouble," Mason said quietly, his hand firm on her waist. "We need to tell your father tonight, before Margaret's gossip spreads." Chloe's face paled. "Tonight? But you said tomorrow. Plans changed." Mason looked down at her, seeing fear in her eyes and hating that he had put it there. "I'm sorry, Chloe, but we're out of time." As they danced, Mason could feel Richard's eyes boring into his back across the ballroom. The confrontation he had been dreading was coming, and there was no more running from it. The dance ended too quickly and too slowly at the same time. Mason led Chloe off the floor, acutely aware of the many eyes following their movement. Across the ballroom, Richard stood with a group of board members, but his attention was fixed on Mason and Chloe with an intensity that made Mason's stomach knot. "I need some air," Chloe whispered, her face pale. Mason nodded, guiding her toward one of the balconies that overlooked the London skyline. The cool night air was a relief after the stifling warmth of the ballroom, and for a moment they just stood in silence, both gathering courage for what was coming. "He knows," Chloe said quietly. I could see it in his face. He knows something is different. Probably. Mason moved to stand beside her at the railing, careful to maintain a respectable distance now that they were in view of the ballroom windows. "Richard has always been perceptive. I should have known we couldn't hide this from him. What do? We tell him the truth." Mason turned to look at her, his expression serious. "All of it. No more hiding, no more pretending. I'll tell him that I have feelings for you, that this isn't just Mason." Richard's voice cut through the night like a blade. They both turned to find Chloe's father standing in the doorway to the balcony, his expression unreadable. Behind him, through the glass, Mason could see people watching with undisguised curiosity. "Dad," Chloe began, but Richard held up a hand. "Not here. My suite, now." His voice was controlled, but Mason could hear the anger underneath. "Both of you." The ride up in the elevator was suffocating. Richard stood with his arms crossed, jaw tight, saying nothing. Chloe's hand found Mason's in the confined space, and he squeezed her fingers, drawing strength from her touch, even as guilt churned in his gut. Richard's suite was elegant and impersonal. The moment the door closed behind them, he turned on Mason with barely contained fury. "Tell me I'm wrong," Richard said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Tell me I'm misreading the situation. Tell me my best friend, the man I trusted with my daughter, hasn't developed inappropriate feelings for my 21-year-old child." "Richard," Mason began, but Richard cut him off. Don't you dare try to explain this away." Richard's control was slipping, voice rising. "I asked you to look after her, to keep her safe, to help her start her career, not to—" "I love her," Mason said, the words stopping Richard mid-sentence. Silence fell over the room like a heavy blanket. Chloe's sharp intake of breath was the only sound. Richard stared at him, something like betrayal flashing across his face. "You what?" "I love her," Mason repeated, more quietly this time. He looked at Chloe, saw tears gathering in her eyes, and felt something settle in his chest. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I fought it. God knows I tried to maintain distance, to be appropriate, to remember every reason this was impossible. But Chloe," his voice softened, "she's brilliant and kind and strong. She challenges me, makes me laugh, makes this empty house feel like home. And yes, I love her. I'm in love with her." "She's 16 years younger than you," Richard said, his voice shaking. "She's my daughter." "I know." Mason met his friend's eyes steadily. "I know all the reasons this is complicated. But Richard, I would never hurt her. Never. You know me. You've known me for 19 years. Have I ever once given you reason not to trust me?" "Until now, no," Richard shot back. "But this crosses every line. She's vulnerable, Mason. She just got out of a bad relationship. She moved to a new city, started a new job. You were supposed to be a safe harbor, not someone who sees her as a woman." Chloe spoke up, her voice quiet but firm. "Dad, I'm not a child anymore." "You're my child," Richard said, turning to her. "And I'm trying to protect you." "From what?" "From being loved." Chloe moved to stand beside Mason, close but not touching. "Dad, I know you're angry. I know this isn't what you expected, but I love him too." The words hung in the air. Mason felt them wash over him, heard them for what they were, a choice, a declaration, a commitment. She loved him. Despite everything, she loved him. Richard looked between them, seeing how they stood together, how they unconsciously leaned toward each other. Seeing the truth neither of them could hide anymore. "How long?" he asked finally. "We haven't—" Mason struggled to find the right words. "Nothing inappropriate has happened, Richard. We haven't crossed that line. But the feelings have been building for weeks. And you thought it was acceptable to pursue my daughter while she was living under your roof, while she worked for your company." "No," Mason admitted. "I didn't think it was acceptable. I tried to stop it. But some things—" He looked at Chloe, saw her looking back with such love and trust that his heart ached. Some things are beyond our control. Richard was quiet for a long moment, his hands clenched at his sides. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with disappointment. I need time to process this. He shook his head. Chloe, I want you to come stay with me at the hotel tonight. Dad, please. Richard's voice cracked slightly. Please, sweetheart. Just give me tonight to think. Chloe looked at Mason, uncertainty in her eyes. He nodded slightly, understanding that Richard needed this, needed to feel like he still had some control, some way to protect his daughter, even if it was an illusion. Okay, Chloe said quietly. Okay, Dad. Richard moved toward the bedroom to call for a staff member to help gather some of Chloe's things from the manor. The moment they were alone, Chloe turned to Mason. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Mason pulled her into his arms, no longer caring who might see. Don't apologize, this is my fault. I should have told him sooner, should have handled this better. What do we do now? We give him time. Mason pressed a kiss to her forehead, breathing in her scent, memorizing the feel of her in his arms. And we hope he understands. And if he doesn't? Mason pulled back to look at her, cupping her face in his hands. Then we figure it out together. Because, Chloe, I meant what I said. I love you. And I'm not giving up on us no matter how hard this gets. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling. I love you too. It should have been a perfect moment. Their first real declarations of love. But the weight of Richard's disappointment hung over them, and they both knew the hardest part was just beginning. When Richard returned, Mason reluctantly let Chloe go. As father and daughter left together, Chloe looked back one last time, and Mason saw all his own fear and hope reflected in her eyes. He stood alone in the suite for a long time after they left, staring at the door, wondering if he had just lost everything that mattered, or if somehow, against all odds, they might find a way to make this work. 3 days passed without a word from Richard or Chloe. 3 days that felt like 3 years to Mason, who threw himself into work with an intensity that alarmed even his most dedicated staff. He stayed at the office until midnight, came in before dawn, and avoided Bradford Manor except to sleep. The house felt impossibly empty without her. On the 4th morning, his assistant knocked tentatively on his office door. Mr. Bradford, Mr. Donovan is here to see you. Mason's heart lurched. He stood, straightening his tie, trying to prepare himself for whatever was coming. Send him in. Richard entered looking tired, older than Mason had ever seen him. They stood facing each other across the desk, 19 years of friendship hanging in the balance. I've been thinking, Richard said finally, about what you said, about Chloe, about everything. Mason waited, hardly breathing. You hurt me, Mason. Not because of Chloe. Well, not only because of Chloe, but because you didn't trust me enough to tell me what was happening. We've faced hostile takeovers together, market crashes, personal tragedies, and you couldn't tell me you had feelings for my daughter? I was afraid, Mason admitted. Afraid of losing you. Afraid of your anger. Afraid that you would see it as a betrayal when it never felt like one to me. It did feel like betrayal, Richard said quietly, at first. But then I talked to Chloe, really talked to her. And Mason, he paused, shaking his head. She loves you, not with some infatuation or gratitude. She loves you with the kind of certainty I've only seen once before, when her mother looked at me. Mason's throat tightened. Richard, I'm not finished. Richard held up a hand. I also watched you at the gala before everything exploded. The way you looked at her when she wasn't watching. Like she hung the moon. And I realized something. You've never looked at anyone like that. Not in all the years I've known you. She changed everything, Mason said simply. I can see that. Richard moved closer, his expression softer now. I won't pretend I'm thrilled about the age difference. I won't pretend I don't worry about power dynamics and what people will say. But Mason, I know you. I know your character, your integrity. If Chloe chooses you, and she has made it very clear that she does, then I have to trust her judgment. And yours. Mason felt relief flood through him so powerfully his knees nearly buckled. Does this mean... It means I'm not standing in your way, Richard interrupted. But I'm also not giving my blessing lightly. You hurt her, Mason, and best friend or not, I will make your life hell. Understood? Understood. Mason extended his hand. Thank you, Richard. You have no idea what this means. Richard gripped his hand firmly. I have some idea. Now, I believe my daughter is waiting downstairs in your lobby. She's been there for 20 minutes, too nervous to come up. Mason was already moving toward the door before Richard finished speaking. He found Chloe exactly where Richard said, sitting in the lobby wearing jeans and a soft sweater, looking more beautiful than anyone had a right to. When she saw him, she stood, uncertainty written across her face. Mason crossed to her in long strides and pulled her into his arms, not caring about the dozens of employees watching. He held her tight, breathing her in, feeling something broken inside him knit back together. I'm so sorry, she whispered against his chest. Dad insisted I stay away while he processed everything. I wanted to call, wanted to come see you. It's okay. Mason pulled back just enough to see her face, cupping it gently. Your father and I talked. Chloe, he's accepting this. Us. Her eyes widened, filling with tears. Really? Really? The smile that broke across her face was radiant. So we don't have to hide anymore? No more hiding, Mason confirmed, brushing his thumb along her cheekbone. No more pretending. No more distance. Mason, she breathed, and he heard everything in his name. Relief, joy, love. Around them, people were definitely staring now, probably already composing emails to spread the gossip. But Mason found he did not care. Let them talk. This woman in his arms was worth any amount of speculation or judgment. Come home, he said quietly. Come back to the manor. I've missed you. I've missed you too. Chloe's hand came up to rest over his heart. So much. They left the building together, hand in hand, and Mason felt lighter than he had in days. Richard's acceptance had lifted a weight he had not fully realized he was carrying. But more than that, having Chloe back beside him made everything else fade into insignificance. As they drove toward home, Chloe's hand in his across the console, Mason allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they were going to make this work after all. The hardest part was behind them, or so he thought. That evening, Bradford Manor felt like home again. Mason and Chloe shared dinner in the dining room, talking and laughing with an ease they had never allowed themselves before. No more careful distance, no more measuring every word and gesture. They could finally just be. After dinner, Mason built a fire in the living room while Chloe curled up on the sofa with a book. It was domestic and simple and perfect. Thank you, Chloe said suddenly, looking up from her pages. Mason glanced over from where he was adding another log to the fire. For what? For fighting for us, for being willing to face my father's anger, for... She paused, setting her book aside. For seeing me as more than just Richard's daughter. Mason crossed to the sofa and sat beside her, close enough that their thighs touched. Chloe, you were never just Richard's daughter to me. Even when I was trying to maintain distance, even when I was fighting what I felt, you were always yourself. Brilliant, strong, impossible to ignore. She shifted closer, her head coming to rest on his shoulder. Mason wrapped an arm around her, pulling her against his side. They sat like that for a long time, watching the fire, content in the comfortable silence. Mason? Chloe's voice was soft, hesitant. Yes? Can I ask you something? Anything. She tilted her head to look up at him. Have you ever been in love before? Before me? Mason considered the question carefully. I thought I was once, in my 20s. But it was nothing like this. Nothing that consumed me the way you do. How is it different? He turned to face her more fully, his hand coming up to trace along her jaw. With her, I could compartmentalize, keep my feelings separate from the rest of my life. But you... His thumb brushed across her lower lip and he felt her breath catch. You're in everything. Every thought, every decision, every moment. I can't separate you from who I am anymore. Don't want to. Chloe's eyes darkened with emotion. I feel the same way. Like you've become essential. Like I didn't know I was incomplete until you showed me what it felt like to be whole. Mason leaned closer, drawn by the gravity of her presence. Their faces were inches apart now, her breath warm against his lips. He could see every fleck of gold in her green eyes, could feel the rapid beat of her pulse where his fingers rested against her throat. Chloe, he murmured, his voice rough, I need you to be sure about this. About us. Because once we cross this line, There's no going back for me. I'm sure, she whispered. I've been sure since that night in the library when you held my face and looked at me like I was precious. Maybe even before that. That was all the permission Mason needed. He closed the remaining distance and kissed her. It was nothing like the desperate, conflicted, almost kisses that had come before. This was certain and claiming and full of promises. Mason's hand slid into her hair, tilting her head to deepen the kiss, and Chloe made a small sound in the back of her throat that sent heat racing through him. She tasted like the wine they had shared at dinner, and something indefinably her. Her hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and Mason was lost. Lost in the softness of her mouth, the feel of her body pressed against his, the small gasps she made when his teeth grazed her lower lip. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Mason rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said, meaning it with every fiber of his being. "I love you too," Chloe replied, her voice shaky but certain. They kissed again, slower this time, savoring rather than claiming. Mason's hands roamed her back, memorizing every curve, while Chloe's fingers threaded through his hair. Time seemed to stop, the world narrowing to just the two of them, and this perfect moment. Eventually they settled back on the sofa, Chloe tucked firmly against Mason's side, his arm around her shoulders. They did not speak, did not need to. Everything important had already been said. As the fire burned low and the night deepened, Mason pressed a kiss to the top of Chloe's head and allowed himself to believe in happiness. Finally, after so many years of solitude and control, he had found someone who made him want to surrender. And surrender had never felt so much like victory. The next few weeks should have been perfect. Mason and Chloe were finally together, no longer hiding their relationship. They arrived at work together, shared lunches in his office, and spent every evening at the manor wrapped in each other's presence. But perfection, Mason was learning, always came with complications. The whispers at the office grew louder. People who had once respected Chloe's work now questioned whether she had earned her position or simply slept her way to the top. Every promotion possibility was tainted with speculation. Every successful project was attributed to Mason's favoritism rather than her own skill. Chloe tried to ignore it, throwing herself into her work with renewed intensity. But Mason saw the toll it was taking, the way her shoulders tensed when colleagues fell silent as she passed, the forced brightness in her smile, the shadows under her eyes from sleepless nights. One afternoon, Mason overheard two senior analysts in the break room. "It's embarrassing, really. Bradford used to have more sense than to get involved with someone so young. What is she, 12 years his junior?" 16, I heard. "And living in his house. Please. We all know what that means." Mason stepped into the break room, his expression glacial. Both analysts paled. "Ms. Donovan earned her position through a competitive application process before she ever set foot in my home," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Her performance evaluations, conducted by 3 separate supervisors, have been exemplary. If either of you have concerns about nepotism or favoritism, I suggest you file a formal complaint with HR. Otherwise, I recommend you remember that spreading unfounded gossip about colleagues violates company policy." The analysts fled, but Mason knew it would not stop. The rumors would continue, would grow, would poison everything Chloe had worked for. That evening, he found her in his study, staring at her laptop with tears streaming silently down her face. "What happened?" he asked, immediately crossing to her. She turned the screen toward him. An anonymous email sent to her work address, filled with vicious accusations. Words like gold digger and desperate jumped out. Implications about her character, her intelligence, her worth. Rage burned through Mason, white-hot and consuming. "Who sent this?" "I don't know." "The address is fake." Chloe wiped at her eyes. "Mason, maybe this is too hard. Maybe I should transfer to another company, somewhere people don't know about us." "No." Mason knelt before her, taking her hands. "Absolutely not. You're not giving up your career because people are small-minded and cruel. But it's affecting you too. Your reputation." "My reputation can withstand anything," Mason interrupted. "But Chloe, if this is too much, if you want to step back from us—" "No," she said quickly, squeezing his hands. "I don't want that. I want you. I just hate that loving you comes with all of this." Mason pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "I know. I hate it too, but we're going to get through this together." Over the following days, Mason implemented changes. He requested that Chloe's performance reviews be conducted by external consultants to eliminate any appearance of bias. He announced a company-wide policy against workplace harassment with clear consequences for violations. He made sure every project Chloe worked on was reviewed and approved by committees that did not include him. Slowly, grudgingly, people began to see that Chloe's success was genuine. Her sustainability initiative won an industry award. Her analysis predicted a market shift that saved the company millions. Her presentations became mandatory viewing for new analysts. But the whispers never fully stopped, and Mason knew that Chloe carried the weight of them, even when she pretended otherwise. One night, as they lay together on the sofa, Chloe asked quietly, "Do you ever regret it? Choosing me? Knowing it would be this complicated?" Mason tilted her face up to his, looking into her eyes with absolute certainty. "Never. Not for a single moment. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me, Chloe. Whatever challenges we face, you're worth all of them and more." She kissed him then, deep and grateful and full of love. But in the back of Mason's mind, worry lingered. He could protect Chloe from harassment, could defend her reputation, could ensure her career flourished based on merit. What he could not protect her from was the sacrifice she was making just by loving him, and that knowledge kept him awake long after she fell asleep in his arms. 3 months into their relationship, Chloe received an offer that changed everything. She came home early one Friday, finding Mason in the garden where he often retreated when he needed to think. He looked up as she approached, immediately noticing the envelope in her hands and the conflict on her face. "What is it?" he asked, setting down his coffee. "An offer. From Green Tech Solutions in Scotland." She handed him the letter. "They want me to head their new renewable energy division. It's a significant promotion, Mason. Director level. My own team, my own budget, complete autonomy over project direction." Mason read the letter, pride and fear warring in his chest. The position was everything Chloe deserved. Recognition of her brilliance, a chance to implement her sustainability vision on a larger scale. But Scotland was over 400 miles away. "This is incredible," he said, meaning it. "They're offering you exactly what you've been working toward." "I know." Chloe sat beside him on the garden bench. "But it would mean leaving London, leaving the company, leaving—" She stopped, looking at him with eyes full of uncertainty. "Leaving you." Mason's heart clenched. "Chloe, I haven't accepted," she said quickly. "I wanted to talk to you first. But Mason, this is my dream position. Everything I've studied for, everything I've worked toward. It's perfect." "Then you should take it," Mason said, even though the words felt like swallowing glass. "Just like that?" Chloe's voice rose slightly. "You're not going to ask me to stay? Fight for us?" "I'm always going to fight for us," Mason said quietly, taking her hands. "But Chloe, I won't be the reason you give up your dreams. I've seen what happens when people sacrifice their ambitions for relationships. It breeds resentment, regret. I love you too much to do that to you." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I love you too much to leave you. Then we find a way to make it work." Mason pulled her close. "Scotland isn't another planet. We can visit each other on weekends, holidays. It won't be easy, but—" "I don't want weekends," Chloe interrupted, pulling back to look at him. "I don't want a long-distance relationship where we see each other once a month and slowly grow apart. I want mornings with you. I want to fall asleep in your arms every night. I want—" Her voice broke. "I want a life with you, Mason, not just stolen moments." Mason felt something crack open in his chest. He had been so focused on doing the right thing, on not holding her back, that he had not considered what she actually wanted. "What if you came with me?" Chloe asked softly. "To Scotland?" Mason blinked in surprise. "You could work remotely. The company has operations there. You've talked about delegating more, stepping back from day-to-day management." Her words came faster now, hopeful. "We could have a real life, Mason. Away from the gossip, the whispers, the judgment. A fresh start where we're just us." Mason stared at her, considering. Bradford Manor had been his sanctuary for years, but it had also been his prison. A place to hide from the world, from connection, from risk. Chloe had changed all of that. She had shown him what it meant to truly live rather than just exist. "You would want that?" he asked, "me uprooting my entire life to follow you?" "I want you," Chloe said simply, "wherever that is. But if you're not ready, if this is too fast, I understand. I can turn down the offer." "No." Mason made his decision in that moment, surprising himself with how easy it was. "Take the job, Chloe. Take it, and I'll come with you." "Really?" Hope blazed in her eyes. "Really?" He cupped her face, thumbs brushing away her tears. "I've spent 20 years building a career, building walls, building a life that looked impressive but felt empty. You filled that emptiness, made me want more than just success, made me want happiness. So yes, I'll come with you, we'll build something new together." Chloe threw her arms around his neck, laughing and crying at once. Mason held her tight, feeling the rightness of this choice settle into his bones. That evening they called Richard to share the news. His reaction surprised them both. "It's about time," Richard said with a chuckle. "I was wondering when you'd realize, Mason, that sometimes the bravest thing isn't holding on to what you've built. It's being willing to walk away for something better." As they ended the call, Mason looked at Chloe, at this woman who had changed everything, who had made him brave enough to want more than he had ever thought possible. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For being worth it. For making me believe in second chances. For loving me enough to build a new life with me." Chloe smiled, that radiant smile that still made his heart skip. Always. And Mason knew, with absolute certainty, that wherever they went, Scotland or anywhere else in the world, as long as they were together, he was home. 2 months later, Mason stood in the doorway of their new home in Edinburgh, a beautifully restored Georgian townhouse overlooking the city. Boxes surrounded them, chaos everywhere, but through the window he could see the castle in the distance, majestic against the evening sky. "It's perfect," Chloe said, coming to stand beside him. "Isn't it?" Mason wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. "It is." The move had been swift but smooth. Mason had transitioned to a consulting role with Donovan Bradford, working remotely and traveling to London only when necessary. Chloe had started her position at Green Tech 3 weeks ago and was already making waves with her innovative approaches. But more importantly, they were free. Free from the whispers, free from the judgment, free to simply be Mason and Chloe, 2 people in love building a life together. "I can't believe we actually did this," Chloe said softly. "Left everything behind." "We didn't leave everything," Mason corrected, turning her to face him. "We brought what matters." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. Each other. That evening, after hours of unpacking, they ordered takeaway and ate sitting on the floor of their empty living room, laughing at the absurdity of 2 successful professionals reduced to eating Chinese food on cardboard boxes. "To new beginnings," Chloe said, raising her wine glass. "To us," Mason added, clinking his glass against hers. As the night deepened, they moved to their bedroom, the one room they had managed to fully set up. Mason had insisted on assembling the bed first, claiming practical necessity, though the heat in his eyes suggested other priorities. Now, as they stood facing each other beside that bed, the air between them shifted. This was their home, their space. No more barriers, no more complications, just them. "Mason," Chloe whispered, stepping closer. "I'm ready." "For everything." He understood what she meant. They had been together for months but had never crossed that final line. Mason had wanted to wait until they were settled, until everything felt right, until Chloe was absolutely certain. "Are you sure?" he asked, his hands coming up to frame her face. "I've never been more sure of anything." Mason kissed her then, deep and claiming, pouring months of restrained desire into the touch. Chloe responded with equal fervor, her fingers working at the buttons of his shirt, while his hands found the zipper of her dress. When they finally fell onto the bed, skin against skin, Mason forced himself to slow down. He wanted to memorize every moment, every gasp, every touch, every whispered confession of love. "You're beautiful," he murmured against her neck, trailing kisses along her collarbone. "So incredibly beautiful." Chloe's hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer. "I love you." "I love you too," Mason said, meeting her eyes. "So much, Chloe, so much." What followed was tender and passionate, careful and wild, reverent and desperate all at once. Mason had never felt so connected to another person, so completely present in a moment. Every kiss was a promise, every touch a declaration. When they finally lay tangled together, hearts still racing, Chloe traced patterns on his chest with her fingers. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For being patient. For waiting until it was right. For—" She looked up at him, eyes shining. "For loving me the way you do." Mason pressed a kiss to her forehead, holding her close. "Always. I will always love you like this." As they drifted toward sleep, wrapped in each other's arms in their new home, Mason felt something settle deep in his soul. This was what happiness felt like. This was what he had been missing all those years. This was home. 6 months later, Mason woke to sunlight streaming through the bedroom windows and Chloe's soft breathing beside him. He took a moment to simply watch her sleep, still marveling that this was his life now, waking up beside the woman he loved, in a home they had built together, in a city that had welcomed them without judgment. Edinburgh had been good to them. Chloe's renewable energy division was thriving, earning international recognition for its innovative approaches. Mason had discovered that consulting suited him far better than the relentless pace of corporate leadership. He traveled occasionally, but always came home to her, home to this. Today was special, though Chloe did not know it yet. Richard was arriving for a visit, but more importantly, Mason had plans that had been months in the making. Later that afternoon, the three of them walked through Prince's Street Gardens, the castle looming magnificently above them. Richard looked relaxed and happy, genuinely pleased with how his daughter and best friend had built this new life together. "You've done well," Richard said to Mason as Chloe walked ahead, photographing the flowers. "Both of you. This move. I was worried at first, but I see now it was exactly what you both needed." "Thank you," Mason said. "Your support means everything, Richard, to both of us." "She's happy, truly happy. And Mason—" Richard paused, meeting his eyes. "So are you. I've known you for 20 years, and I've never seen you this settled, this content. That's worth more than any career achievement." Mason watched Chloe laughing as she tried to capture a butterfly on her phone. "She changed my life." "I can see that." Richard clapped him on the shoulder. "So when are you going to make it official?" Mason smiled, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "Today, if you'll give us your blessing." Richard's eyes widened, then filled with emotion. "You have it. You've always had it, really. I just needed time to see what you two saw from the beginning." As they continued walking, Mason caught up to Chloe at a scenic overlook. The city spread below them, beautiful and peaceful. "It's gorgeous, isn't it?" Chloe said, leaning against the railing. "Yes," Mason agreed, though he was looking at her, not the view. She turned, catching his expression, and smiled. "What?" "Chloe Donovan," Mason said, taking her hands. "When you walked into my life that rainy night, soaked through and heartbroken, I had no idea that you would completely undo me. I had built this perfect, controlled existence, and you demolished it, made me want more, made me want everything. Mason!" Chloe's eyes were already filling with tears. "You made me brave enough to risk my heart, to leave behind everything I had built, to believe that happiness wasn't just for other people. You made me whole." He dropped to one knee, hearing Chloe's sharp intake of breath, aware of Richard watching with tears in his own eyes. "Marry me, Chloe. Let me spend the rest of my life loving you, supporting your dreams, building our future together." He opened the box, revealing a vintage emerald ring, the color of her eyes, the color of the dress she had worn the night everything changed. "Yes," Chloe whispered, then louder, "Yes! Of course, yes." Mason slipped the ring onto her finger and stood, pulling her into his arms. She kissed him with joy and promise, and forever, while somewhere nearby, Richard applauded and laughed. When they finally pulled apart, both crying and smiling, Mason saw their future stretching before them, full of challenges and triumphs, quiet mornings and passionate nights, the beautiful ordinary life they had fought so hard to claim. "I love you," Chloe said, looking at the ring on her finger, then up at him with those eyes that had captured him from the first moment. "I love you too," Mason replied. "Today, tomorrow, always." And as they stood there, the Edinburgh sun warm on their faces, surrounded by beauty and possibility, Mason knew with absolute certainty that losing control had been the best thing that ever happened to him, because Chloe had taught him that true strength was not in control, but in surrender. Surrender to love, surrender to hope, surrender to the beautiful, terrifying, perfect adventure of sharing your life with someone who sees you, truly sees you, and chooses you anyway, every single day, forever. Leave your comment and share this story with someone special. It truly helps us keep bringing new stories to you. And if you want to follow every chapter of this emotional journey, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. Your support makes all the difference.